Welcome to the Delchamps Gallery of Boehm Porcelain. This space was formally dedicated on March 9, 1967, at a black tie reception held at Bellingrath Gardens and Home. The gallery is housed in Walter and Bessie Bellingrath's former guest house, a building designed in 1939 as an open six-car garage with 4 guest rooms above it. The Boehm Gallery was created to display 86 works created by artist Edward Marshall Boehm, which had been collected by members of the Delchamps family of Mobile, a name synonymous with a chain of local supermarkets since the 1920s. Mr. Boehm and his wife Helen attended the dedication ceremony, along with former New Jersey Governor Robert Minor, who served as Masters of Ceremonies. Also present were the donors, Oliver and Fred Delchamps, and their sister, Annie Delchamps Moore, and a number of relatives of the Bellingraths. Oliver Delchamps was an early member of the Bellingrath Morse Foundation. During the ceremony, Mrs. Moore, his sister, presented the Boehm collection on behalf of the Delchamps families, including her 2 brothers. At the time of the dedication, Mr. Boehm's art was already on display in the White House, the Smithsonian, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, Buckingham Palace, Élysée Palace in Paris, the Vatican, Stockholm's Royal Palace, Tel Aviv's Herz Museum, and some of the finer art museums in the United States and Canada. The Boehm Porcelain Company was founded in Trenton, New Jersey in 1950 by Edward and Helen Boehm, who borrowed $1,000 to get started. He was the artist, she was the promoter. Edward Marshall Boehm was raised in a Maryland orphanage where he trained in animal husbandry with the hopes of one day becoming a veterinarian. Instead, he began modeling hard-paced porcelain figures of animals and later birds. Mr. Boehm was a very shy man. His wife was the exact opposite. It was Helen's determined perseverance joined with his talent that resulted in his work being admired around the world. Helen had seemingly never met a stranger and was constantly bringing potential customers to her husband's studio. Mr. Boehm would often rush in, his arms dripping with wet porcelain, and hurriedly explain that he was so sorry, but he was in the middle of something important, and disappear behind a door. The collection at Bellingrath Gardens includes Boehm's earliest pieces, which featured horses, bulls, and assorted dogs. These pieces were glazed. His later works were not. When Mr. Boehm turned his attention to birds, he created an elaborate aviary on his property in New Jersey, where he could study his subjects in detail. Birds were collected from as far away as Africa and South America. The result is visually realistic as well as a technical miracle. Wide wingspans and paper-thin feathers are made of delicate porcelain, but look like the real thing. Each of these creations required a number of molds in which the porcelain was fired. The molds could only be used a number of times to keep the design crisp. This resulted in the limited numbers created of each model. Some were limited to an issue of 100, others 50. For the dedication, in tribute to the generosity of the Delchamps families and for their warm friendship with Mr. and Mrs. O.H. Delchamps, Mr. and Mrs. Boehm donated a special sculpture, the ivory-billed woodpeckers. The piece, 7 feet tall on its plinth, had originally been created for a special exhibition of the artist's work held in London in July of 1964. Only 3 examples of this were created, and the piece on display at the center of the Delchamps Gallery took Mr. Boehm over 5 months to create. Helen Boehm successfully brought her husband's talents to the attention of the Eisenhower White House. President and Mrs. Eisenhower commissioned pairs of Canada geese and whippets for their collection. Duplicates of these may be found in the Delchamps collection. Edward Marshall Boehm died just 2 years after the dedication of the Delchamps Gallery at Bellingrath Gardens. His creations, which had once cost $3 in the early 1950s, now ranged in price from a few hundred to nearly $30,000 for the Fondo Merino on view at Bellingrath Gardens and Home. Helen Boehm carried on her husband's work for nearly 30 more years before she retired. In 2015, the Museum of American Porcelain Art in Cleveland, Ohio purchased the assets of the Boehm Porcelain Company, giving the Boehm Showroom, LLC, limited but exclusive use of some of those assets, including many original molds and trademark Boehm porcelain. Many of these pieces have been admired now for more than 60 years, and guests at Bellingrath Gardens and Home have a unique opportunity to see some of the finest works ever produced by Mr. Boehm as well as the firm in the years after his death. These range from his early glazed pieces through the numerous birds and flowers he created. There are also camellias and roses, as well as a series of American and English plates featuring his designs. The collection at Bellingrath Gardens and Home is the largest of its kind in the world and is a welcome addition to the gardens around it. We are sincerely indebted to the Delchamps family for their generous donation to Bellingrath Gardens and Home.